Last night, after a couple of frothing cups of ale, decided to tell me that he wants me to introduce him today using only information I learned about him last night. Fortunately for him, I can't really remember most of that, so I'm going to read the blurb that's here. Dr. David Caldicott, MD. Dr. Caldecott is the author of a brand new Australian training program for authorised prescribers of medicinal cannabis, which he'll present to us today. David has worked as a specialist emergency physician for 25 years. He's a senior university lecturer and adjunct associate professor. A founding member of the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Observatory, created to establish the infrastructure and support systems that an emerging medicinal cannabis industry will require. David is the author of numerous publications, a researcher, educator with specialties in novel illicit compounds in the ED, stimulation, medical education, innovation in the emergency department, medical response to terrorism, and disaster medicine. David is a patron of United in Compassion and also sits on the UIC Scientific Advisory Board. His close alliance with United in Compassion is a direct result of a common desire for open science and collaboration in order to enhance outcomes and promote compassionate access to medicinal cannabis for Australian patients. He's also got a lovely looking family and is a big fan of Doctor Who. We are very privileged and proud to have him on board. Please welcome Dr. David Caldicott.
Ladies and gentlemen and friends, how the hell are you? I'm David, and I'm disappointed that you bottled out there. It was a far more interesting introduction that was waiting. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land here. I would like to pay my respects to the custodians of this knowledge who are also in this room. They're as important. I would like to pay respect to my peers and my mentors. I am merely a Padawan in the company of great Jedi in this space. And I have learned a great deal, not only speaking to the doctors here, but also to the people who are trying to advance this cause. And I feel very much part of your tribe. So, much to the chagrin and frustration of United in Compassion, I'll probably be talking about something quite different to what's in the program. That's usually what happens. They ask me maybe 6 months in advance, and I'm like, well, I'll give you a title, but it'll probably be nothing like that. Maybe I'll touch on something that's in the program, but there'll be other things as well. I'm a Luddite, and we'll see if this thing works. I'm likely to break it, but we'll go. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're up to and how you might want to get involved. You already know all that crap. I'm just David, by the way. I should warn you, what we're talking about is dangerous. It's illegal, currently. And, I think it's very important that you understand that in Australia at the moment, we are still breaking the law for doing something that people are doing everywhere else around the world. How hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. But that's okay, because I like the company of dangerous people. You all look like you're all in the middle ground of civil society. You're not. You're lethal and waiting to express yourselves. Because the most dangerous people are clever, and they're compelling, and they're charismatic. And there's not one of you that I've spoken to since I've come here who hasn't had an amazing story to tell me. And I've got misty on several occasions listening. So you're excellent storytellers. And for me, it's a family thing. We're all dangerous. If your friends in New South Wales Police have me killed, there's another one ready to rise up and take the position. We breed them hard in Canberra. It's cold. I like to see myself more as disruptive than dangerous. And when I was growing up in school, disruptive was a terrible thing. And now it's a business thing. Now it's good to be disruptive. I've finally been rehabilitated. So let's consider ourselves all more disruptive than dangerous. So where should we begin this story? Let's begin in the Alps, right at the very beginning, obviously. My involvement with this bunch of renegades, well, I guess it starts, I come to this from a medical perspective. I am not an apologist for pot. I'm an emergency doctor, and I have treated people who got into strife from taking too much of it. So do not for a second include me in this sort of strange exclusion group of people who are just trying to make medicinal pot legal for recreational purpose. No, couldn't be further from the truth. I'm a doctor, and this is about medical cannabis. Those papers that Dr. Russo was talking about, the ones that suggest that cannabis can be dangerous recreationally, I wrote them. That was me. And we did that a decade ago, 3 years before it hit the press. It can be dangerous, but not in the way that we're talking about. I'm not attached, nobody would have me, nobody would pay me to do anything, so I have no financial disclosures whatsoever. So I'm not in the employ of any pharmaceutical company. My beginnings with this lot, or with this man, and I saw this story, and I was moved. I truly moved to tears. And then I met this woman, and then I was terrified to the point of opening my bowels, because she is a terrifying lady. If I had any thoughts of not getting involved, they were removed by the sheer intimidation of yet another Oompa Loompa in the realm of medical cannabis. I am greatly moved by this family's commitment to this cause, and it would be churlish of me not to be involved. So I thought, well, what could I do? I mean, this is not my field in a medicinal sense, but there are things that I can do, and we thought we'd do something and play to our strengths. Before that, I tell you where we're coming from. This is our soul. This is what this means to us. Just these are the things now that's happened since we got this underway. This is now just so commonplace overseas, and still we're struggling in this country. Our tenets in this space are that our approach to medicinal cannabis over the last century has actually been factually, scientifically incorrect. It's been misrepresented for both philosophical and political gain, and no other reason whatsoever. That is now demonstrably true. We are long overdue for a correction. This is important, that the debates regarding medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis are separate and need to be kept separate. One taints the other. You can have an opinion on both, but those debates must be kept separate if success is to be obtained in either. There are opponents to a regulated medicinal cannabis market. I respect them, I disagree with them, from both sides of this debate. There are people who think that a regulated market of any cannabis should not exist at all, and then there are those who think that there should be no regulation. We're in the middle. We oppose Big Green, and we support people before profits. For those of you who don't know, thank you. Big Green is just another form of exploitation, like big alcohol or big sugar or big tobacco, but exploiting cannabis and exploiting the true suffering of patients, and rather than putting the patients first. And we will collaborate with anyone in this room who is committed to open science, which means that if the science matters more than the profit, you're in with us. And the bottom line for us is, does everything that we do in this space pass the test? What do I mean by that? I like to call it Dan's test, but it could be any one of your tests. Is what we are doing likely to benefit someone who was in Dan's position right now? Not in 10 years' time, not when the profits are on the table, right now. And if that isn't the case, I'm not interested. So it could be any of you, any of your kids. If it's not good for them, find someone else to play with. Because everyone wins when you actually put the patient first. The pharmaceutical industry, although they might portray things as such, they don't create cures. They create customers. And this is not part of what I see as the future of this industry. There is an attempt at adding value to cannabis, which I think is a rort on the patient, and is actually a form of exploitation. And we'll talk about this in a little while. For those of you who think that's just me being hysterical, go and have a read of this book. This is a tremendous book by a young man called Ben Goldacre, extraordinary UK physician who has just dissembled the pharmaceutical industry in the UK. A fabulous book. You can get it on Kindle or online. It's well worth a read. I have to say also, I'm mortified by the manner in which some of my medicinal or medical colleagues are enrolling people in trials, not for the purposes of working out what's good for them, but for the purposes of advancing their academic careers or for the purposes of making money in conjunction with pharmaceutical companies. You're people and you're not lab rats. So I think this is very important that you understand who you're playing with. We're going to talk about how you can spot the types of people that you're playing with. So I'm here to tell you about something new, our little disruptive idea, this Australian Medicinal Cannabis Observatory. It began 2 years ago. It was inevitable, it was quite clear, the writing was on the wall, that medicinal cannabis legislation was going to happen. There was no question in our mind. There was absolutely no preparation whatsoever. They might have been preparing for a meteor strike, for all I knew. There's nothing going on in Australia to get the background to this up and running. And in Canberra, which is a lovely place, thank you very much, despite what everybody says, I love it there. We're very, very well positioned to negotiate and discuss policy with key players. For my foreign friends, you might think Sydney's the capital of Australia. No, it's Canberra. We have deliberately avoided the clinical trial space. It's messy, it's political, it's tarnished with big pharma in Australia at the moment, and it's not really our gig. So we've tried to play to our strengths, as I've said. So the idea is that we engage with the Australian patients, the consumers, learn from their experiences and put them at the very forefront of what we want to do. We want to create a trusted registry where you can give us your medical information, we can look at it, and we can see your progress over time, but coupled to the analysis of what you're actually consuming. Because I think that's a question in particularly many parents' minds, is how do I know what I'm using is safe for my kids? I'm going to show you how we intend to do that. And finally, to produce an independent, non-pharmaceutically sponsored education program for our clinician colleagues. How many clinicians are in the room right now? There's an Australian one. Good on you, girl. And so we've got a few, but they're grossly outnumbered by our overseas colleagues. There should be a lot more, and it's our intention to bring this sort of information to a broader clinician base. So you've seen the survey. The survey's going gangbusters. Thank you very much. It's a horrible survey. It's like 40 questions long. Everybody said nobody would answer the survey. And of course, they don't know my army of darkness. You guys would answer anything, as long as it's, in your key area of interest. So we've already, in the space of a fortnight, got over 200 respondents. One of the things, and in the interest of open science, I'll tell you right now, one of the things that we've done is we've used some of the elements from the National Household Survey to work out whether there are people who are answering the survey are crazy people. Because that's possible. We're talking about an illicit drug. And so we've introduced a psychometric test within there. It's embedded, see if you can find it. And you're all normal. There are no wackos answering my survey. You are middle Australia. And this is very useful information for me. So if you haven't answered it, go and answer. We want to hear about you. This was going to inform our registry as it emerges. It's been designed over the last 18 months. We launched it actually in Nimbin. Why Nimbin? Well, spiritually, I think many of you folk have an affinity to Nimbin. I see many faces here from Nimbin. It's like Nimbin goes to the races here at the moment. So it was more important to me to bring it to you folk there than it was in any sort of scientific endeavor. It's for the consumer, it involves the consumer, and it is 100% not market research. We have no market, so how can it be market research? There are other things out there that want to find more about you so that they can tailor the message so that you'll buy what they're peddling. Not us, we just want to get to know you a bit better. We will be doing this again and again and again. We want your feedback. When you answer the survey, if you think I've fecked up something, tell me. I'm very, very relaxed about being criticized. I have 3 daughters and a wife. The survey is there to inform our registry. And the registry is where we want to hold your data. It's not a big spooky thing. It's the same sort of place where the National Household Survey data is held. It's held at the Australian Data Archive, hosted at the ANU. And I'm advised that the actual security based around that is as good as anything in Australia, including the intelligence community. There's no way that anybody will have your data. It's independent of industry. We want to follow you. We want to see how you're going. We want to tell your stories in a scientific way. And it's an opportunity for those people who are committed to the same causes as we are, to open science, to not making profit out of your suffering. We will share this data with them pro bono because they're on the same page. We have recruited the very best analytical expertise in the country. This is new to them. They're interested. They want to engage. There's a man in the back there who knows more about this field than anybody in Australia. We might play with him as well. But the Research School of Chemistry at the ANU is truly strong. And with the help of people who have been doing this for some time, we hope to be able to provide a service where we can identify everything that's in everything that you can provide us. With the blessing of our friends, our new regulator friends, my Whovian colleagues, we think that we will be in a strong position to submit for a license so that you can submit to us for the analysis of your products. And we can sort the wheat from the chaff. Intriguing to me that you have such expertise, particularly clinical expertise in this country, and such poor representation from my clinical colleagues. And we really need to get to the nub of this. We need to get to teaching the teachers and to start educating clinicians so they are less fearful. There are a whole bunch of different reasons why people are fearful of this. Coming from toxicology, even recreational cannabis, for me, is actually one of the more boring substances that just doesn't hurt as many people as people say it does. And even this medicinal stuff is even safer. And yet, our clinical colleagues, because of the illicit connotations, are terrified of getting involved in this space. Most clinicians are very conservative. Don't tell anybody it's a secret, but they're very conservative folk. I hope that those two that came here from Australia can go back to the College of Physicians and say, actually, the deal's kind of done overseas. What's the problem? So our plan is to do this very legit, very straight up, in conjunction with the Registration Authority, APRA, and the colleges of the physicians. There's no point in doing this in an ad lib way where it can be dismissed or excused as a sort of a factional issue. It'll be online. There will be a test. It'll be updated regularly and current. And we are very excited to be discussing with our far more qualified overseas colleagues about opening an Australian chapter of what's going on in America right now. We're in negotiation. It's very exciting to have that sort of expertise available to us. The education basically consists of two types of modules, basic modules and clinical modules. The basic modules are broken down. You would find it hard to credit, but you guys haven't actually evolved that much from the rest of the world, despite living on a big island for so many million years. So the whole principles of treatment are very similar here today as they are elsewhere in the world. So I don't have to reinvent this shit. It's already out there. But what is very interesting, of course, is that the social history of cannabis in Australia is very different. You may think that you're all here because you're the descendants of convicts, which is not a bad thing. You're dangerous, that's to be expected. But in fact, there's an abundance of evidence to suggest that Joseph Banks was very interested in establishing your country as an outdoors hemp growing industry. Not a lot of people know that. This is the business of hemp is in the fiber of your country. I have to take the opportunity to say thank you so much to the people I've been living in the National Library of Australia, going through the old newspapers and looking at the old documents to set up this course and put it in an Australian context. And it won't be much surprise to many of you, particularly the more conspiratorial of you, that a lot of this has actually been denuded from the internet. You can actually rewrite history on the internet, but you can't rewrite hard copy. And going back to the archives, it's fascinating to see how frequently cannabis-related products were being used in Australia for everyone everywhere. There's a great story of horsemen riding into Melbourne, the sort of, Banjo Patterson lot with their akubras. I don't know if they existed then, but presumably the historical equivalent of akubras and whips, demanding that the attempts to ban cannabis-containing tinctures be reversed because it was the only thing they had access to out bush. That's no longer available on the internet. It's in the archives. So they're amazing. This is chlorodyne, which was used up until very recently. Well, certainly within a century, which was an extract containing cannabis in Australia, used for everything. And the idea is that our first module, the social history side of things, will be open to you all. There's a story to be told, and you need to know that story. You have the story of your children, you need to know the history too, because the history has been rewritten. There has been revisionism in this space, and it does not represent the truth. The clinical modules, we are deliberately limiting to a narrow group of conditions. We have to. We have to be able to pitch this to people who are skeptical and who will only accept that which is absolutely concrete. So what we're aiming at the moment is cancer and palliative care, severe intractable seizure disorder, and refractory pain. We have every anticipation that this selection will expand with the support of our colleagues from overseas and with increased buy-in from our colleagues at home. There are definitely such things as cannabis use disorders. There's no drug that has no side effect. And there are also issues to do with special groups of users, the use of cannabis in pregnancy, the use of cannabis in children, driving in cannabis. These things are the big questions that the polys and the legislators want to know about. And we need to address those if we're going to advance this cause. We're in dangerous times here. Let me just sort of digress. This is what I do. I apologize. In Australia, we're on the cusp of something great, but we're easily diverted. And this is why, because of the dollar value of this market, for no other reason. And I warn you now, there's snake oil merchants out there. Be careful. There are people who want to take advantage of you. And there are challenges ahead for us. And I largely see them as follows: in opposition, as exploitation, impatience, and legislation. There are three main groups of opponents to this cause. Those who just don't know it. And I put among them, sadly, tragically, my own profession, who are grossly unaware of the literature. And there are also people who are confused between the difference between recreational and medicinal cannabis. Let's be quite clear, within this group, there's also a group of people who deliberately confound recreational and medicinal cannabis to try to tar the two with the same brush. But that's easy. We address that through education. That's not a problem for me. There are those who have a moral opposition to any sort of illicit drug use. They're not prepared to accept that the fact that this drug is illicit has got nothing to do with the harm that's inflicted on society. It's more of a abstentionism, temperance movement that initiated this. And that's fine. That's fine too. There are people who I don't give blood transfusions to because they reject them. Do I let them determine who should have blood transfusions in the country? No, I don't. I respect their right not to be cured. That's fine. I do not respect their right to determine who else should not be cured. There are those involved in companies that make opiates or other analgesics. These we put to the sword. I don't know if you're familiar with the news outlet called Vice. It's not nearly as naughty as it sounds. It's tremendous. It's an independent news network, and they did this tremendous expose. So it's not me that's telling you this, it's Vice. But if you look at some of the most vociferous opponents to cannabis medication in America, for example, you should also quietly look and see who their sponsors are. This is compromise. This is compromise. And I tell you right now, this happens in Australia too. So look to see when they're giving their speeches, when they're giving their papers, who's sponsoring them. These people receive enormous endowments from the pharmaceutical companies that are directly producing the direct competitors of a cannabis market. One other subcategory I've come across in Australia very recently, and it's very disappointing. But people who are working with companies that would block the use of a botanical product. And these include my own colleagues in my profession and in science. I have a serious problem with this. And there is a war emerging. Winter's coming. Why would anybody do that? Because it competes with a product. Look at this one here, Sativex. I'm sure it's great. It's lovely. It costs $16,000 a year to prescribe. And the London School of Economics, well, I don't know if you've heard of them, it's kind of like Harvard for economics, in their cost analysis said there's absolutely no benefit in providing a pharmaceutical compound which could equally be replicated by a botanically grown one. The only benefit in this space is for the pharmaceutical company, period. So what we're seeing at the moment in Australia, because of the money involved, is transformation of good scientists into bad, of good doctors into bad. Caveat emptor. Watch who you're playing with and what you're buying. If you want any idea about what's going on as far as the rest of the world is watching, one of the things I have to do in emergency medicine is keep my eye on everything, everywhere, always. And the data that I get with regards to illicit drugs comes from a diverse set of sources, from consumers, from dance music magazines and the like. This is a graphic novel, which is written, or a series of cartoons, like an allegorical sort of story, the equivalent of a modern-day Pilgrim's Progress for cannabis. And it's a series of heroes and their trials and tribulations in dealing with Big Green. It warns us of the shape of things to come. It warns us of a character or a series of entities called the prophets before people. That's what they look like. They're like the bad little child out of Sin City. They're sinister. And this is who they are. They present themselves to you as friends. And then their darkness grows and it brings others. And it spreads. Now, in the global market for this graphic novel, there is one nationality that is represented with its own character. This is the rest of the world looking in to Australia. That's right, it's Australia. So the rest of the world is looking at Australia and saying, sweet Jesus alive, who the hell is in control here? Because the big companies are taking control. So how do we identify this exploitation? Cui bono, as Cicero, the Roman lawyer and orator, used to say. Who stands to benefit? Is the purpose to make money? Who is making that money? Is it going offshore? Is there a commitment to open science? What are they promising and when do they say they're going to deliver it? What conditions do they demand of you? Are you being asked to sign confidentiality agreements? And what sort of conflicts of interest are involved? I give these to you to ask anyone who wants your help, because your help is invaluable at the moment. These are things that we need to be aware of as a tribe, this concept of corporate capture and regulatory capture. Corporate capture is the idea that a few entities will buy into this market to such a degree that there will be no possibility of negotiation. This is something very well known in other fields in business. The consolidation of the market, where a few firms dominate everything. When that happens, as is the case with the alcohol and tobacco industry, what you can do is then determine regulation. Now, I have great faith in my regulatory colleague who's with us today. He's a Doctor Who fan, and there's no way that Doctor Who would be swayed by this sort of thing. He has some ambition to be the next Doctor Who, and if he can stay true to the course, I can work with him on that plan. So what do we do about exploitation? What do you do about exploitation? It's a lot easier than you might think, because you hold all the cards. You hold everything that everybody wants. And if you don't like what's happening, you take your ball and you walk away. It's that simple. Researchers, industry, everybody needs you more than you need them. Walk away from them. We've seen the way it should be. Our friends from Israel have shown us what it's like to play together, what it's like to be open and share your knowledge. That's what we need. We do not need to be another brand in Australia. I think one of the big things in this community is probably impatience. Why the fuck are we still here? What are we still talking about this shite? Why isn't it happening? It's expectation of the consumers matched, however, to the hesitancy largely of my profession. And there is going to be a battle here between these two, and we need to make sure that we conduct ourselves with a degree of restraint, with humor, with what we all know that we are as a group of caring individuals. Those of you who have small children will know this. We need to have courage and be kind. It's from Cinderella, but there's no better way of applying this. Those people who don't believe in us, be implacable, but be kind, because these are people who could help us if we can recruit them to the cause. There are challenges ahead in legislation. You may not be happy with how far it's gone. I have got mixed emotions about it, but there's no denying there have been massive bans. In fact, huge cynics, the great shoulders of alcohol and drugs policy, people like Alex Wodak, 2 years ago at a similar gathering that we had in Canberra, said this would not occur in the next decade. So in fact, this is far faster than many of us had ever expected would occur. This yokel farm-to-pharmacy lark is well underway, and I'm sure as and when the pollies come up with an equally quirky-sounding equivalent, we might actually develop some way of getting the pharmacy into the patient. It may sound quite extraordinary to my overseas colleagues that we are in a position to grow in Australia, and yet we've got these enormous forests which are going nowhere. There is no compassionate access scheme in Australia. That's crap. I'm calling BS. TICS is not a compassionate access system. The nomenclature sucks. Its eligibility is incredibly limited. It's under justice, for Christ's sake, not health. It has to be under health. It's dependent upon police discretion. If it was under Lou's discretion, that'd be grand. But most people know. The quantities involved completely confound. It reveals the misunderstanding of people between the differences between recreational and medicinal cannabis. And there are certain researchers in Australia who are opposed to a real compassionate access scheme because it could interfere with their clinical trials. Well, boo-hoo-hoo. I'm terribly sorry that it might. There are issues of driving, and we need to address those, and that's important. So, look, I think I've been very restrained. People who know me will know that's the case. So I thought, I don't want to disappoint my opponents who are scattered to the audience, so I thought it was time to be dangerous. Because I am dangerous. This group of people is dangerous in an implacable, civilly disobedient way. These are dangerous people that you're dealing with here. These are the people who I think, if I was a politician, I'd be nervous about. Imagine you were having a general election and these people were wandering the streets. Goodness gracious me. You as a group are articulate, you're well informed, you are morally justified, you have the side of righteousness on your side. You represent, in fact, the majority of the population, perhaps not as activist and advocate as you are, but the rest of the population walks with you. You campaign with wit and satire, and it makes people laugh. You're well-resourced, and you're focused on a single issue. You're terrifying. There are days I wonder, and I think maybe you're Irish. I want to introduce this concept to you, all right? So this is for my political friends. In any population, there is a spectrum of opinions of what we stand for. Some are complete nut job ideas. I do occasionally use Twitter, and my favorite hashtag at the moment in Australia is RWNJ, right-wing nut job. I get to use that almost daily. So the way things are usually sort of posed within policy is that most things that are policy only get adopted because they're popular, because the result is going to be beneficial to people who are charged with winning what is essentially a beauty contest every 3 or 4 years. In Australia, that policy bracket is very narrow indeed. It is a very safe place. And at the moment, it's largely being determined by what the politicians want to talk about, not what the population wants to talk about. This is called Overton's window of political possibility. It's a thing. And what you see, it's frequently in political circles, it's manipulated. So when Tony Abbott got elected, the first thing he did was issue a manifesto about turning, I think, Australia into a military state or something, much further to the right of where most Australians felt it should be, which gave him the opportunity then to drift left and look as if he's being kind. And that's a political game that all politicians play. We're in the middle of an election. And these people who are, generally speaking, unassailable, they are so vulnerable right now. And it's a little naughty for me to say that, because I'm sure that they're scared. But I really, truly believe that you have to make this a political issue. There are those of you who would say, no, now is not the right time. I disagree. Now is the time to get undertakings. Now is the time to get promises. Now is the time to ask questions which will go on record and to which people can be held responsible for in the next few years. The only reason this has happened, the only reason we have got as far as we have, is because of the pressure of this community. There's no politician who is driving this forward. You are driving this forward. To my political friends, the people who are looking a little too casual to be really casual, you have options. You can either broaden policy to include this issue. That's a safe option for you. Because if you don't, Australia's going to get all Canada on your ass. And they're going to shift in its entirety to the left. So you either include something like this in your policy, or you drive voters in a direction you really don't want them to go. I don't get to vote, so I don't have a dog in this fight, but that's the outcome. This is the way politics works. And I think your politicians need to be reminded of this every now and again. So, I was going to show you a video, but I don't think we have the technology, so I'd better wind up before I get lynched or arrested. Apparently it's very easy to get arrested in this town. We're living in very interesting times, I think. In opportune times. The times where we can make a difference. There is progress. Don't be downhearted. There is progress being made. You would not believe the furious activity that's going on behind the scenes here. We just have a particularly conservative elected group of representatives. There's 100 years of dumbed down, stupid prohibition that needs to be acted against. And it's going to take at least a decade to work that around to the way that maybe somewhere like Israel or the United States is doing. It's a sad indictment. With great respect to my American colleagues, it's embarrassing that they are ahead of us in this field. Honestly. Seriously. How did that ever happen? The evolving market is naive. And it's vulnerable. And it needs protection. It needs protection from you. There's an abundance of profits. There are zeros that I don't understand in this market. I'm not interested. I've decided to have children, not BMWs. But nobody has to be mercenary. There's plenty to go around, both academically and financially. We can collaborate like our friends from the US are collaborating, like our friends from Israel are collaborating, and not be trying to stick the knife in each other. And at all stages, this issue demands the patronage of the patient population. This is your issue, you own it, do not give it away lightly. So, if you're interested in what we do, come and chat to me. I love chatting, as you noticed. Answer our survey. Please, correct our survey. If in the next version of the survey you think we haven't addressed something, let me know. I'll put it in. I might even call that question your question. Who knows? But let us know what you think of it. Come and visit us here. We now, with our Australian Drug Observatory, have a site where you can come and support us. I don't want your money. I don't need your money. There's plenty of money. I'm a genius at getting grants. I have sideburns and an Irish accent. You guys are vulnerable to that sort of shit. But what I do want you to do, any donation you give us over $2 is like a vote. And I in Canberra can turn to people and say, yeah, I'll see your opinion on this and I'll raise you the 200,000 people who've said they like what we're doing. So fuck you. So come and support us. Let us help you. I've burnt all my bridges now today with pharma anyway, so there's no way I can be accused of collaborating with them. I hope that I can persuade you that we're on the side of the angels. We don't want to make a buck out of this. We want to offer an alternative that is going to be good for the country that I'm bringing my children into, bringing them up as Australians. I want something a little bit more compassionate than currently exists. So if you like what we're doing, come and follow us, contact me, follow me on Twitter, and continue being dangerous. Kudos to you all.